We'll pick up some time here because, well, I certainly could not tell you that there hasn't been things going on at the state legislature. There has been a lot going on, but fortunately, very little of it affects us directly. And that is a good thing. I'll tell you, we've had some of our biggest challenges, legislative challenges, in the context of the development of the two-year state budget, which is exactly where we are right now. Unlike the federal government, the state government has to have a balanced budget. They can't just print money when they need it. They can't have deficits at the end of the budget cycle. It has to be balanced. And the current budget, House Bill 153, does just that and addresses the serious problem of an $8 billion hole that was predicted if nothing else happened. And that is a big number. You may not think it is that big a number when you look at the size of the state budget over a two-year period is over $50 billion. But it's not that easy when you consider that roughly 70% or more of that $50+ billion is used to educate, medicate, and incarcerate. Those are the three areas that take up the bulk of the state budget. And nobody wants to cut that. Or at least doing so is difficult. So what you're left with is a much smaller chunk of change that the state is spending on ODNR and the parks and EPAs and everything else the state does. But Governor Kasich, to his credit, and he campaigned on this, came in there and he said, well, you know, we're not going to raise taxes and we're not going to raise fees. We're going to solve this budget problem without doing any of that. In other words, he has said, we're not going to count on, you know, manna from heaven or some tax increase that will raise revenue. And how did we get in that situation? Well, I listed the causes, and the reason why this is not easy is that the budget was balanced 2 years ago on one-time money, on and it was affected because state revenues are shrinking, and it also used a lot of money from the federal government, the stimulus dollars that came through to prevent police layoffs and all that kind of thing. Those are gone. By one-time money, some of you may remember that the state got a tobacco settlement. Ohio was one of the several states that sued some of the big tobacco companies, and they derived revenue from that. And that was taken during the last budget to balance it. So those types of one-time sources are gone. The stimulus funds aren't coming, and that's why that $8 billion hole exists and why it's so hard to fill. So what does he do? Well, the biggest losers, well, he's cutting and trying to privatize, shrink the size of government. The biggest losers are probably local government. There is a local government fund which exists at the state level. It's kind of like it's like a revenue sharing program. And cities and counties and townships all get a piece of the local government fund, and they have come to rely on it. And that is being cut big time. Schools, K through 12 and higher education, are being cut as well. Nursing homes, they get a reimbursement for their beds, both for-profit and not-for-profit from the state. It is a big number. And they are getting cut as well, that subsidy. Those three areas probably account for quite a bit of making up the shortfall. Nursing homes, they get tagged. They don't get tagged, but they get pointed to a lot over the years. But they are a very powerful lobbying entity. And they do quite well in the General Assembly, and in the past they've been able to kind of fend off attempts to change their subsidy. But this time, I don't think it's going to happen. It will be cut. I think they're going to soften the amount that they were going to cut a little bit. But those are probably the biggest losers. The impact on real estate, as I said, there is none. Not much of one anyway. And I started to talk about what has happened in the past in the context of the state budget. You may not Strickland, but his predecessor wanted to do a lot of things that would affect you and your way you do business. Broaden the scope of the sales tax to include your commissions and all sorts of real estate related services as well. Impose a statewide transfer tax on real estate in addition to what can be collected locally. Those were the kind of things we had big fights over and were able to prohibit from or block from happening. But that's not in here. The one thing that is in the budget bill, which is good, and Lori Garland is going to talk about this in a little while, we have been working in a collaborative effort with the Ohio Department of Commerce and the specifically the Ohio Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing on a slew of license law revisions, most of which they initiated, a couple of which we initiated. And we've been working on this product, this package of changes for 2 years at least. We worked with Ann Pettit's predecessor, Kelly Davids, and we also are working with Ann. And the goal has always been to come up with a package that both the regulator and the regulated can agree to. And we've done that. And right now, those changes are in the budget bill. So that's a great thing. I mean, and it's a sensible vehicle for those types of changes because it is something which is agreed to. What we tried to do is look at the big picture and work with them, and the results were very good. So Lori will talk about at least some of those things. There is a study of the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, which is in the budget. Initially, it was going to be a very small study that consisted of 3 people. OFA was very concerned that they were being attacked and that the legislature was calling into question their very existence. And OFA is a good thing. I mean, we supported it and continue to support their first-time home buyer program and other programs that they do. And what OFA did, however, the lobbying effort was not to just say no to a group to look at them, because to evaluate what they're doing and whether they're doing it right, whether they're fulfilling a need. Because a lot of state agencies are undergoing that same scrutiny, and that's not necessarily bad. But what they did do successfully is expand the study group to include representatives of industries that work with OFA, like ours, and the lenders and the investment bankers. And so they have done that, and the home builders, and you name it, some private sector representation. And they have achieved that, so I think that study will take, probably, I'm sure it'll remain in the bill, and then it will be conducted in a much broader-based way. The one potential adverse consequence, and it kind of sticks out, is that by doing this, by making these cuts to education, to local governments, that the reaction will be the local government or the school district will go to the polls and ask for locally imposed taxes to make up for the revenue loss that they get at the state. Now, is that possible? Sure. Have we seen that? Not really. I mean, we have seen just the opposite, actually. I mean, to their credit, the units of local government and the school districts which have planned for this should be okay. And if you couldn't see this coming one way or another, sooner or later, you're looking at it with blindfold on, because this was, and many units of local government and schools did take the steps to plan for these types of reductions. If you didn't, then you got some painful choices to make. But you know, it's too early to tell. But what I've seen, and at least what's been reported, is efforts by, you know, like the teachers and the school board to get together and put together a contract which reduces costs in some way. And the police have done the same. I think the safety forces in Toledo did the same thing recently. So, you know, we'll see what happens. Where does this stand? The House passed its version. The Senate passed its version. The bill is now in a conference committee of 6 people. They keep canceling the meetings of the conference committee until I think what they're doing is they're just trying to get an agreement. And then once they get an agreement, they'll hold a couple hearings and then they'll vote it out and be done. And it has to be done before July 1st. So that is what has been really dominating the state legislature, as it does every 2 years. And so far, you know, I think they're on the right track. They really are. Unless you're a proponent of tax increases, and the current administration is not of that ilk. Any questions at all about that? Okay, well, there we go. That issue just will never go away. I'll tell you, it is, when I started 20 years ago, this was an issue. It probably had been an issue for 10 years before that, and it's an issue now. And I'm not going to dwell on this because it's important, but what happened there is that I mean, the goal is to try and achieve a balance between protecting the groundwater and doing it in a reasonably cost-effective way. That's the goal. I mean, no one argues with that. But achieving that goal sometimes has been distorted and resulted in big hassles for property owners who are not on a sewer line and have the need for a septic system. I think that the problems kind of manifested themselves in a big way when a bill was passed about 3 years ago or 4, which resulted in a new set of rules, and in short, it put into the local health district area way too much discretion, so that in some local health districts, the health commissioner automatically opted to the Cadillac of systems all the time, whether it warranted it or not. And usually those are those expensive mound systems. And people were screaming bloody murder. So then the General Assembly had to go in and suspend those rules, or try to, with limited success. Then the same guy who sponsored the first bill sponsored this one in an attempt to bring some reason to the process and to take away some of that discretion. And the bullet points I listed up there are law changes which are designed to do just that. I mean, I'll tick off a couple of them. The emphasis is clear on examining and promoting options to make sure that all the new technology that's out there, if it rises to a certain level of security, that it really works, then people ought to have that option and use it. This issue of vertical separation, I'm not going to get into that one, but it's important because soil conditions across the state are different. And soil conditions and the amount of soil is important when you're trying to protect the groundwater, and there's some much more specificity in there than there used to be. Repair of existing systems is encouraged. Now, under the old law, it was not. And some local health directors wouldn't let you replace or repair your system if it could be repaired. They didn't care. Put in a new one and make it be a mound system. I mean, we had instances of that. So those are good things. Yes, it does permit mandatory inspection programs to be conducted locally. But I'll tell you, I don't know all that much about this issue, but one thing which is pretty clear is that the reason systems generally fail, is because they aren't maintained. And this would kind of force the issue, but the nice part about this provision is that if you can demonstrate that you have a service contract to maintain your system, then you're exempt from the inspection. Yes, sir.
I mean, I don't know why it's not this simple. We have a sprinkler system in our house, and I'm required every year to pay $50 to have somebody come check the system.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a simple sprinkler system.
Right.
I mean, why is it required the same thing then?
Why is it?
Why isn't it?
Well, it can be.
I mean, that's what I'm saying,
It can be. Yeah, and I heard a little bit of controversy about that, the fee going up on the sprinklers systems, and they, blah blah blah. Well, if you could.
I feel it's a gotcha, but we're required.
Right. Okay. Well, those I have high hopes. I really do, that this will resolve a lot of the problems. Much like the prior legislation, this is going to require a new set of rules. And the rules are currently being developed. We have a spot at the table. Actually, we have two spots. We've come this far and exhausted a lot of resources on this issue over the years, so we don't want to let it slip away during this rulemaking process, the progress that we hope that is achieved. So we did retain the services of a Columbus lawyer from Porter Wright. He is an expert in this area. His name is Chris Schraff, and we have retained his services to help us through this technical rule writing process. What's the timetable? These rules have to be developed and go into effect the 1st of next year. So that's coming up. All right, well, there's another one. This is another bill, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but there's this feeling by the regulator of surveyors and professional engineers that every time you put a septic system in the ground or replace one, you need a survey. Now that sounds to me to be a little overreaching, and certainly a full employment act for some of the people that do surveys. And there's a dispute right now, and it still exists, between a regulator of professional engineers and surveyors who think, yes, that should be the case when you look at the definition of surveying, and then the Department of Health, which regulates septic systems, at least at the state level, says, no, that's not true. That doesn't make any sense. Sure, a survey may be necessary in some cases, but not every time. And that has not been, that dispute has not been resolved. So along came Ron Amstutz, who's a chairman of the House Finance Committee. He's from up in Orville, or Worcester. And he put in this legislation which just says no. The act of surveying doesn't include the siting of septic systems, something to that effect. So he's really forcing the issue. And this bill has passed the House. It's over in the Senate. We support it. Even if it results in a logical resolution of the issue, that would be okay. So this will certainly, I haven't heard too much more about this within the last month or so, but it's halfway through the process, and it could well become law, as is, if the parties don't budge. And so far, I haven't seen an indication that they budged. All right. Meth labs. This is a dandy, too. Have any of you represented a buyer or seller who has and the property has had meth lab activity on it? No? Yes? Okay. It's kind of hard to market it, isn't it? I would think it's really hard. Because it's costly to clean up, and the standard is, I think there is a standard now, but it's pretty new, and there's no federal money to help with the cleanup process. Anyway, the intent of House Bill 33, and this was last session, it has not been reintroduced, is to provide a means of the general public to go somewhere and find out if a property has had illegal meth lab, well, I guess it's all illegal, meth lab activity on it, as reported by law enforcement. And the bill started out with kind of a dual notification process. One was to create a database, a statewide database under the Department of Public Safety, which would list the properties. And then they would come off. If you could demonstrate that they had been, that the contamination had been addressed, then they would come off. And that's basically what the bill said as far as it got last year, which was good. I mean, the problem with it when it was first introduced is it had another disclosure means at the local level, which was filing something with the county recorder's office. The sheriff would do that, saying meth lab activity detected. You know, it's right on the public record. And the only way to get rid of it, well, you couldn't get rid of it. You could get another document to put on top of it which says it's been cleaned up, but the stigma in many people's view remains, whether you got the cleanup covenant or not. So when the bill finally was amended, that piece of it was gone, which was good. So this bill, we ended up actually supporting it. We had concerns. The sponsor was amenable to those concerns, addressed them, and we ended up supporting it. But it died. And you might say, why? Because when you look at it, it passed the House 98-0. That's pretty good. That means there was no partisanship involved. Republicans and Democrats all voted yes. Well, I think it ran out of time. It was not a high priority in the Senate. It was not our bill, even though we ended up supporting it. But we are giving serious consideration to resurrecting old House Bill 33 and maybe initiating it ourselves, because it does fill a need. That need is there, and it does so in a very reasonable way, which doesn't result in property being permanently stigmatized. So we'll see. The fact that it was 98-0 gives us a lot of hope that maybe it has some legs in this session of the General Assembly.
So it never got tested in the Senate?
No. I don't think it had a hearing in the Senate. The last issue I wanted to bring up to you very briefly at the state legislative level is also an outgrowth of Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank looked at appraisers and appraisals in the context of mortgage lending and in particular mortgage lending, and saw the need to regulate what are called appraisal management companies at the state level. So this one kind of kicked the issues to the state to do it with broad guidance on what the regulation should contain. So we are working on it. If you are an appraiser or you know an appraiser, you may have heard he or she grumble about AMCs. They are accused of, some of them at least, are accused of sending in appraisers from who know nothing whatsoever about the nature of the community where the property is located. They're outsiders. They don't know. They are accused of squeezing appraisers in terms of the fees that they pay if you get fortunate enough to be put on the list. And there's a laundry list of complaints, some valid probably, some probably not valid. But it doesn't matter because Dodd-Frank says the state's going to regulate you in some form. And we are working, and this is happening all across the country. We have counterparts in other states, and we look at their bills and see how they've done it. And while the bill has not been introduced yet, it's pretty close. Appraisal management companies operating in Ohio will be regulated by the Ohio Department of Commerce, Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing, probably. And the one piece of it that you may be interested in, or maybe not if you're not an appraiser, is that it reverts to prior law requiring that an appraisal be conducted for mortgage loans. I mean, that is the norm, but sometimes it's not. And this would say that it needs to be. Banks own a lot of appraisal management companies. Not all of them, but quite a few. And you would think that they would have some concerns. They normally do if you do something to affect the way they run their operation. But the fact that something has to be done according to federal law has taken some of that away. And what we have found is, at least at this point in time, most of the financial institution which is most engaged in this issue across the country is Wells Fargo, I think. And we got a call from a representative of Wells Fargo about this draft, and the first experience was very positive. The gentleman had some suggestions on how the current draft could be changed for the betterment, at least in Wells Fargo's view. But they were not outlandish demands or anything like that, or threats or anything of the nature of the sort. So we have high hopes that that'll get done. I don't know. I'm sure Dodd-Frank imposed a deadline, but apparently the deadline has not, I don't know what it is, and it must not have expired because we haven't done it yet, but we will. And so that should be a good process and a good result.